Dear guests, thank you for coming. And today we have a panel about, of course, Russia's war in Ukraine, the implication for international world order. And it's my honor and pleasure to have here, first of all, these very important ladies from my Department of International Relations, Odesa National University, Professor Iryna Maksymenko and Professor Polina Sinovets. And in their frames of this conference, I want to add that they represented not only Odesa University, but Odessa Center for Non-Proliferation in Transition. But now this scientific center moved from Odessa, unfortunately, and works in exile, based at the University of Malta. We have not only prospects from Ukrainian side, but also from the side of our friends from Poland, Professor Agnieszka Legucka from Polish Institute of International Affairs, and Professor Julien Theron from Sciences Po, France. Thank you, dear participants, and we have about 20-25 minutes for presentation. And the first presentation from Professor Iryna Maksymenko will start next minutes if you're ready. So, okay, 20-25 minutes, yours, Iryna.
Thank you very much, Professor Brusylovska. And first of all, let me say thank you for the organizers for this very important, very up-to-date event, and thank you for giving us such unique opportunity to share with you our thoughts, our hopes, our beliefs, and of course our troubles regarding Russia's war on Ukraine. And as I do believe, it's not only Russia's war on Ukraine, but it's Russia's war on European security and European peace in general. So in my presentation, I would like to address such issue like security guarantees, and just try to explain what is more crucial elements of this issue for me, and try to share with you, and maybe to invite you to discuss the most important and most complicated elements of security guarantees. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, let's start with the following. Security guarantees have been on the agenda of Russia-Ukraine relations since the declaration of Ukraine independence. The fact, and you know about it, that last December, Moscow put forward the list of security guarantees for itself and for Europe as well. But for me, it looks like a list of demands as a precondition to low tension in Europe. Otherwise, Moscow threatened to prepare a military response similar to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and soon embodied in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Therefore, Russia's war on Ukraine contributes to exacerbating the debate on security guarantees that can be an element of peaceful settlement of the war and peaceful settlement to return to peace and stability in Europe. From the Ukrainian standpoint, one of the conditions any negotiations to end war is to provide security guarantees to Ukraine. Instead of the Budapest Memorandum, I will just say some words about Budapest Memorandum a little bit later. And the first draft of such security guarantees provided for Ukraine to be declared neutral. And my question is, however, does neutrality correspond nowadays, especially in terms of unprovoked war against Ukraine in particular? From our side, can security guarantees be effective enough in the current security environment? So, in general, security guarantees are the obligations of a state or several states not to threaten the security, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of another state. In the nuclear world, security assurances have also become a tool for nuclear weapon states to control nuclear proliferation among the non-nuclear weapon states. And the latter require security assurance in cases they have serious concern on national security, especially related to these security concerns with the threats from another states, mainly nuclear. And Ukraine is an example of both cases. First of all, Ukraine inherited the third nuclear arsenal after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and while declaring its intention to become a non-nuclear state, Kyiv started to look for obtaining security guarantees incorporated into a robust, high-level document issued by the nuclear weapon states, first and foremost the United States and the Russian Federation, before any denuclearization, of course. At that time, Russia was looking to preserve its influence on the Republic of the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, by creating the Commonwealth of Independent States and Joint Strategic Command. Additionally, Russia did not treat Ukraine as an independent state and rejected to recognize the administrative border between former Soviet republics as the state border between two independent states. For instance, two resolutions of State Council of the Russian Federation in 1992 and 1993 on illegal cession of the Crimea Peninsula and Sevastopol city, they're adopted. And Ukraine had to address United Nations Security Council to figure out this issue. Such Russia policy, of course, poses a direct threat to territorial integrity of Ukraine. As Serhiy Golovatiy, the Member of Parliament and then Minister of Justice of Ukraine, noted, this should have a powerful factor of deterrence against the aggressive policy of Russia. Otherwise, Ukraine would suffer the fate of Georgia and Moldova, there Russia is resecuring its vital interest with imperial methods. Now we come to Budapest Memorandum. Just a couple of words on that issue, because I believe that you know about this document enough. Okay. The Budapest Memorandum, signed in exchange for the nuclear disarmament of Ukraine, provided political commitments from the nuclear powers, the United States, Russia, and Great Britain. And the significance of this document can be described as follows. The state signatories obliged to refrain from economic and political coercion, threats to sovereignty and territorial integrity, to hold consultations, and to seek immediate United Nations Security Council action to provide assistance to Ukraine if the latter should become a victim of an act of aggression or an object of a threat of aggression in which nuclear weapons are used. Nevertheless, this memorandum failed to prevent Russia from exerting political and economic pressure, drawing red lines and making unilateral changes to land and sea borders of Ukraine. For instance, we can remember Tuzla crisis of 2003, or, according to Andrei Illarionov, a trial war that has happened just in 6 months after signing the agreement between Russia and Ukraine on state border. So, memorandum also proved unable to prevent Russian aggression against Ukraine in 2014 and, of course, to avoid Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, moreover, supplemented by threats of the use of nuclear weapons. And this situation is exceptional in the modern world, and Putin's rhetoric is the standard language of the Cold War era. The use of nuclear weapons as a tool for waging new colonial wars and fighting for the status of global power is unacceptable. Moreover, such ideas are extremely destructive for the world order and international regimes, for international law and international organizations as well. Already today, we can see some evidence that there is a growing distrust in security guarantees that individual states already have, such as Japan or South Korea, or are negotiating to receive them, like Iran. And Ukraine is no exception. Nevertheless, I do believe that Ukraine has to think to elaborate different scenarios about security guarantees in advance. And in my presentation, I would like to discuss with you two the most debated scenarios of security guarantees. It's neutral status and new security guarantees agreement. And speaking about neutrality, it was to note the following. First of all, the declaration of neutrality is losing support as a format for ensuring long-term security in general. The previous experience of non-alignment, Ukraine, officially declared in 2010, did not prevent Russian aggression and violation of sovereignty and territorial integrity. In this regard, I would also like to address and to draw your attention to Moldova case. As you know, the Constitution of the Republic of Moldova had a clause on neutral status of the country. But according to Maia Sandu, the President of the Republic of Moldova, the neutrality of Moldova is not observed by everyone. On the territory of Moldova, there is an army of another state, the Russian Federation Army. Of course, it marked like peacekeeping forces, but Moldova didn't invite them. Did it ask Russia to be a peacekeeper, to send peacekeeping forces to Moldova territory? And the similar situation we can observe in Ukraine. Additionally, speaking about neutrality, I would like to stress that even European analysts point out that in modern Europe, united by a network of relevant agreements on political and military cooperation, including within the framework of the European Union, there is particularly no neutrality. Of course, we can refer to Swiss case or to Ireland case, but there is another side of these cases. Russia's demands for the demilitarization of Ukraine, that means, in Russia's approach, to destroy all infrastructure, not only military, contradicts not only common sense, but also the generally recognized right of any state to possess and develop its defense capabilities. So, since 2014, we have heard a lot about Austrian or Finland model for Ukraine to declare neutrality, but is it relevant today? Moreover, internal debates in Sweden, in Finland, even in Ireland prove that neutrality was being undermined as security guarantee tool. Another option I would like to address as well is signing of an international treaty on providing security guarantees for Ukraine from, first of all, the nuclear states, to which Germany, Italy, Poland, and any other states can join. But in this case, we also have some kind of complicated issues, and they related with approaches of Ukraine and Western partners, as well as Russia, on various aspects of such treaty. I would like to address two the most complicated and maybe most controversial. First of all, it's about Russia's participation in such kind of treaty. In Ukraine, experts and politicians do not support this idea, comparing the new treaty with the Budapest Memorandum, only with an extended number of participants. One of the reasons for the Budapest Memorandum failure is what the document did not include any enforcement tool to ensure sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. In that case, Russia's participation will negate any attempts to prescribe such a tool in new document, which means that guarantees will not work. Moreover, any security guarantees only can work under effective international law and international institutions, as well as valid international agreements or bilateral, multilateral agreements. However, today, Russia refuses to comply with international norms and rules, reserving the right, it's officially stated in strategic documents of Russia Federation, reserving the right to proceed from any agreement that do not meet the interest of the Kremlin. The second issue is Ukraine's requirement to include an article in the new document, similar to Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. And this position of Ukraine should be seen as an attempt to obtain effective tool to deter and to prevent any attack in the future. However, this is exactly what Putin's threat to use nuclear weapons they're aimed at. Moreover, Western experts are rather, and I share these feelings, that there is no possibility, no window, as for today, for any legally binding security commitments, for receiving or achieving any legally binding security commitments from the Western states to Ukraine. And we can just observe that European politicians, as well as the United States officials, they refrain from giving concrete answers, any concrete promises, just demonstrating mostly a willingness to discuss separate issues, to contribute to a deal, or to become a guarantor, and that's all. Thus, as for me, the most reliable and the most promising security guarantee for Ukraine is further development of security and defense capability of Ukraine with the deepening international military, political, and economic cooperation. In particular, of course, we are not speaking about Ukraine's joining to NATO in short or even middle-term period, but we can think about, I don't know, to elaborate some kind of strategic alliances with individual countries. And one of example of some examples is Lublin Triangle or agreement between Ukraine, Great Britain, and Poland on such kind of alliance and cooperation. At the same time, I will ask you not to forget about Russia's list of so-called security guarantees, and that there is no, sign that Russia is going to put this list somewhere or in a bin. I believe that this list of demands with lists of security guarantees will be put on the table during any negotiation on ceasefire agreement, on peaceful settlement agreement, on security guarantees to Ukraine. And in this case, one article is rather important with regard to my topic. It's Article 7, about parties that are NATO member states shall not conduct any military activity on the territory of Ukraine as well as other states in the Eastern Europe. As for me, Russia pretends to perceive any international exercises as a threat to Russia or as a violation of the OSCE principle to not strengthen one state's security at the expense of the security of other states. Just forgetting, just doesn't mention that Russia per se is a country that violates this principle. To some, Ukraine being attacked by its guarantor provides a case in point for the question of whether security guarantees are sufficiently reliable to ensure long-term security. And one lesson of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, accompanied by a threat to use nuclear weapons, is that reliable security guarantees can only be achieved through firm defensive alliances with clear commitments. Let me stop here and invite you for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. But I think we need to have all presentation and then discussion about all these very interesting topics. Yeah. So our next participants, Professor Polina Sinovets, please.
Should I turn this on or is it already turned on? Yes, it is. Okay, as far as I'm from completely different world of political science, for some reason, let me, before speaking about the international nuclear order, let me give you some basic notions. So to be sure, I'm sure that some of you already know this, but I'm not sure that everyone. So I would like to introduce some things which are important for understanding what I will say. So, of course, you know that unfortunately or fortunately, our world is a world living with nuclear weapons, appeared after 1945. And the basic treaty which is regulating the relations between states regarding nuclear weapons is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty signed in 1967, which gives the right to 5 permanent members of Security Council to retain nuclear weapons, while other states joining the treaty without the right to develop nuclear weapons. And therefore, this treaty permits states to, those states who has nuclear weapons, to practice the policy of nuclear deterrence or to be able to use nuclear weapons for security purposes, mainly for deterring the aggression. However, as far as the NPT has the article which gives a hint on the possibility of reaching the world free of nuclear weapons, some states finally has lost their patience and decided to conclude the treaty which will finally ban nuclear weapons. And this treaty is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, signed in 2017 and which entered into force last year. The main idea is that nuclear weapons are evil and that all policy and politics based on this evil is also evil. So nuclear deterrence is put out of the frame of the legal policy. And so why I am speaking about this? Because the recent event, in particular the aggression of Russia against Ukraine, actually triggered the things which were already there. In particular, it triggered the polarization of the two groups of states potentially interested or non-interested in nuclear weapons. So first group is the group which has gathered last week in Vienna for the first state party meetings of the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Of course, there were none of the P5 members. Again, there were almost none of the NATO states because they are living under the nuclear shield of the United States and other nuclear, not all, but some nuclear weapon states. And of course, Russia, China, and some others. But there were other nations who were very interested in finally concluding the treaty and finally reaching the goal of the new nuclear world. Why the Russian aggression against Ukraine has become crucial for triggering this process? For the reason that nuclear weapons now are not only the tool of, are not just the weapons. They are not only the weapons which deter the attack on your territory, but also the weapons you can coerce with to do something or not to do something. In particular, today it's a tool of the power projection. As you know, Russia is the biggest nuclear weapon state in the world, who actually coerce the whole world from supporting Ukraine militarily, from interfering to the conflict, just because it has nuclear weapons. And it clearly threatens to use it against whoever who interferes in the conflict. So it was the part of the Putin speech on the 24th of February this year, and he said that whoever interferes in the conflict will have the unprecedented consequences, which was the direct hint on the possibility to use nuclear weapons. And also, we know that a couple of days ago, he also put his nuclear deterrence forces on high alert, which was also made in purpose, because at that point, the deal, Ukraine was asking to provide it with the no-fly zone. So the main idea was that Poland could supply Ukraine with the old Soviet bombers, and the United States would supply instead the F-16 aircrafts to Poland, so Ukraine would be able to defend itself from Russian aircrafts and Russian missiles. So that deal never happened because after Putin declared that he put his nuclear forces on high alert, the United States canceled the deal. And this is the moment I would like to pay your attention at, because at some point the states who are fighting for getting rid of nuclear weapons said, okay, so we are fed up with all these nuclear weapons threats, and you see that nuclear weapons prevents the whole world from defending Ukraine, just because Russia has nuclear weapons and it is using and playing with threats, with nuclear threats. So let us fight to get rid of nuclear weapons. And at the same time, they always repeat the phrase that nuclear deterrence never works. However, this case, the last case, the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, just shows that nuclear deterrence works perfectly because not in the case of the United States and NATO, who were not able to deter Russia from invading Ukraine because Ukraine has never belonged to that defense space. to the NATO organization. But actually, this is the issue which shows that nuclear deterrence is a very effective policy, because one of the main, and yeah, for your consideration, nuclear deterrence and deterrence theory is one of the most studied theories in the world, and I think during the last 50, 70 years, the most number of studies were published on this issue. So it has a great number of theories which explain whatever, and it also, of course, explains many things during this conflict. And in particular, if we speak about the fact that deterrence didn't work against Russia to use a nuclear weapon, weapons against Ukraine, it shows that. So actually, the main point of deterrence theory is the relation between the interest of the state to protect the protégé, so-called protégé, and between the credibility of the threat that you will act for somebody is very much related to your interest to defend somebody. Therefore, if you show the attacker that there is no alternative for you than to defend, then the attacker would stop from some aggressive actions. Or if you, and again, there is a so-called the credibility curve, which says that the probability of deterrence that you will punish, I mean, you will step up with nuclear weapons is 100% if your territory is attacked. If it comes to allies or vital interests, it's a little bit smaller, lower, and then when it comes to the other interests, it goes to zero almost. So what we have here, we have Russia, for whom Ukraine is a vital interest. It's almost perceived as a part of the Russian territory, where the probability of using nuclear weapons is very high, like close to 100 or a little bit less. And we have the United States, for whom Ukraine is not a vital interest and whom Ukraine is not an ally. Therefore, the probability of using any kind of force is going to zero. Of course, deterrence works, because Russia is effectively deterring the United States and other world from interfering in the conflict. And in this regard, I think that deterrence theory can give a lot of interesting outcomes and even very interesting methodological tools for studying this conflict further in different dimensions, because it's not only about nuclear. However, this thing, it made the enemies or those who step against nuclear weapons, they made them consolidating and saying that, yeah, we should reinforce our efforts to going towards a non-nuclear world, and that the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is not enough anymore, because this treaty is actually standing for nuclear deterrence, and nuclear deterrence is a damaging thing because it's a tool of power projection today, and it gives Russia these opportunities. On the other hand, there is another group which is theoretically also stepping out of that kind of consensus which Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty presented. This is the group of the state who are potentially, we don't know them yet, but I think that here I can refer to Andreas Umland said that these states will be the middle powers who are not protected by any kind of nuclear shield like NATO nuclear shield, and who will be interested in not only defending themselves but also for some power projection. So what lessons they can take from the situation when the biggest nuclear state in the world is attacking the state which denied its nuclear weapons potential in exchange for the security assurances. First, nuclear weapons are very good if you would like to feel yourself safe, and if you would like to make some power projection. Second, never deny nuclear weapons. And third, never trust any kind of assurances, because the only thing which is reliable in this life is a nuclear bomb, because it really works. It's not the bomb which works, it's the fear which works for you. So this is why we have a very potential possibility that in some years, not of course in the moment, there will be a number of states who won't be interested in staying within the NPT framework, because NPT is a very egalitarian treaty permitting some states to have nuclear weapons and not permitting others to do this. And what we'll have at the end? We'll have this treaty, the states who don't agree with the NPT because it permits nuclear deterrence and it permits nuclear weapons, and the states who want to drift away and to build up the non-nuclear world, and the states which will potentially be interested in the creation of the more nuclear world, which are also not agreeing with the NPT. But the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, it was the biggest consensus between nuclear and non-nuclear states that this is life, we should live somehow, and there is a certain agreement between the states how to survive. This tendency, the conflict, I mean the aggression of Russia against Ukraine, actually is going to erase that reality, that treaty which stands in the middle and which somehow fixes, which creates the current world order. And instead of it, we'll have two worlds, two groups who are stepping on the very marginal positions and who are doing whatever to bury the NPT because it's not satisfying anyone anymore. And this will actually, I think, it will be a very big explosion in the international world order because actually it will explode the system built up after the Second World War, and it will actually lead to the world anarchy, where there will won't be any legitimate reality for any of the groups which are standing for different interests and values. Yes, probably this is it. Maybe I was speaking not so long as I was supposed to, but I didn't want to make you too tired because of this topic. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you. So, and next participants, Professor Agnieszka Legucka, move from nuclear weapon to informational weapon. Yes?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation once again for the conference. I hope my last speak and lecture last year was not so bad that organizer asked me again for this conference. So once again, thank you very much. My topic is about Russia information war, and maybe warfare perhaps would be better definition, and reshaping international order. My previous speaker had a very interesting thoughts, and I would start with the sentence that Russia is at war with the West for the long time. It's particularly hard to say from which date we should count this war. But the problem with the West was that it was very difficult to understand on the state of this warfare with Russia. Because for many years the West did not recognize that issue, that problem, that it is on the stage of the war, and especially that maybe it be a bit confusing for you, because for many times, and there is a lot of speeches from Putin himself, that he perceived, for example, internet as a Western domination sphere. So I suppose I would say that this moment of starting the war with information war in the modern time would be the Munich speech of this confrontation with the West. And since that time, Russia started to develop very much in this particular instruments to reshape the special services to work on the informational warfare. And especially that Vladimir Putin was perceiving Russia as a weaker power in that sense, that Russia do not have that at that moment did not have so many instruments, like, for example, internet. He was saying that it is was created even so by CIA, and that's why Russia should do something about it, and it's really started to do it. It is very difficult to organize the speech in the short time, but nevertheless, I would like point some elements, and I hope for the discussion later on, because as I said, West started to realize this state of the war quite not so long ago, actually, only when it hit very directly the West, and especially United States. I would say it would be 2016, the US elections. But the first country, of course, was like Baltic states by the cyber attacks, and also, but the most important country that was hit by Russia warfare, the informational war, and also informational warfare was, of course, Ukraine. But when the West started to slowly realize that it is something like informational warfare, there was a very nice term invented in the West, but it was transformed to Russia as a hybrid warfare. And this term is very, not very clear, because it was differently understood in the both sides of the planet, let's say like this, because from Russia point of view, the war is everything. It's like civilization clash between the West and between the Russia and the West. And Russia was using a term of гибридная война and hybrid warfare. I would say it as a maskirovka, very known term in Russia, special services to prepare itself for the real war, the conventional war. But in the West, in many researchers was pointing or researching, or even more, I would say, when it started to realizing a problem of informational warfare or the hybrid threats, it started to think that it is a problem. Yes, it is an issue that we as a West need to be concentrated more on informational warfare, on the psychological or the psychological operation, and etc., etc. But there was in the West way of thinking. There was understanding that it will be that kind of threats will be under the threshold of warfare, the real conventional war, and that was the biggest problem, the biggest mistake of Russia, hybrid understanding, information warfare, and exactly the preparing for the real war. Because I'm saying about the West, we were preparing for the different war with Russia when we exactly realized that we are at war with Russia, or maybe not at war, because we were calling it as we understand Russia threat or challenge in that sense of nothing wrong happened. Okay, so very, very good book wrote Mark Galeotti, who exactly pointed it directly some years ago, that he wrote a book about political warfare, when he pointed very clearly how Russia is understand differently that kind of hybrid threat, hybrid warfare, and how it uses as a maskirovka while it was preparing all the time to the traditional war. And my point is that when we as West should realize or understand hybrid warfare or informational warfare, which is very important problem and threat, we need to understand that, as today Minister Przydacz said, that we cannot somehow divide those issues. I mean, like, the car, you have hybrid cars, you always have two engines. And it's always like in Russia understanding of warfare, hybrid warfare, that they have two engines and they always can use this conventional warfare. And exactly, it's also at the same time is using informational warfare. Why? Because, and we also can observe it on the battlefield, Russian army is not so, let's say, put it on the different way, it is not the second war army. It is not the second army in the world on the battlefield. It can be defeated. And Ukrainians are proving it every day, but they only need arms to do so. But when it comes to informational warfare, I would put 2 points. That there is two aims or goals, main two goals, I would say. The first goal was and still is to make the West weaker than Russia, because Russia is not so powerful at its trying to present itself, but to make West weaker in the international order, it needs to weaker its opponent. And the biggest opponent is, of course, United States, this equal rival, as Russia perceives it in its propaganda and political thinking. But at the same time, when it comes to instruments and how it perceived or messaging this, Russia is using, or it is very good to say that it's, I will use it in past tense, because Russia was using RT and Sputnik, because it is already blocked by the European Union after the invasion to Ukraine. But it is very good to show how Russia was doing that, because I don't know if you know the main slogan of RT, the Russia TV show, the TV website, or the sponsored by Kremlin TV website and etc. I don't know if you know the main slogan of it. Yes, question more, right? So this is I think that was the very clever thing how Russia was acting in the Western sphere or democracy, in democratic societies, because it was Russia was trying to undermine our society, our trust to the institution, to polarize democratic societies, to question more. What is more democratic than discussion, than changing opinions, and etc. But Russia was, when you, I mean, I have to do it. I'm researching propaganda and disinformation, so I have to do it. So when I was researching and watching RT or reading newspapers and articles, it's not so obvious in many cases that it is pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin propaganda. It's not so hard, propaganda. You cannot in the West, of course, in like fronts or English messages or articles. Even in Polish Sputnik was not so visible at the first front as observer. But what was very clever from Russia's strategy or tactic in the disinformation campaigns, Russia was putting itself as an anti-systemic actor, as an anti-elite actor, to be somehow victim of the system, of the capitalism, of the globalization, of the something which is status quo. So every messages you can find in many languages website of RT or Sputnik. Russia was like sometimes just putting some messages for those who are not happy with the situation which is all around. And we know that people in Europe are not always happy with the system, with the elites, with the something what is going on all around, right? We are we are critical people. We do like criticize our government, we do like criticize our neighbors, and etc. So Russia was like pointing our weaknesses everywhere around. And just only sometimes we're putting some messages anti-Ukrainians, anti-NATO, anti-Americans, anti-everything what was going on all around. And then only just messaging. We are only questioning more. We are not providing messages pro-Kremlin. We are questioning more. So that was very nice from the analytical point of view to see during the pandemic how Russia was messaging about vaccination. So in the West about pandemic was like people should be free from any restrictions. In Russia, you need to follow restrictions because the vaccination is very important, etc. So that was very obvious that here all around in democratic societies they were working to weaken the West. Okay. I know that I can make a lecture for 60 minutes.
For 5 minutes.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. So here is the bubble of the West. How Russia was working here in the West to undermine, to weaken the opponent, the rival. And not always, of course, in the United States was even more the messages and agents that were present to polarize the system, to polarize the disinformation campaigns, and etc. But the main, and this would be the second point, the main reason, the main goal of the propaganda and the informational war is to take back the will to fight. And I would like to underline this message. It is working either in the West and either in Russia. Because sometimes when I look at the informational warfare, I realize that we are living in some bubbles or like in planets. We are sometimes communicating in the different type of communicators. Here we work on Facebook and Twitter, in Russia and post-Soviet space, mainly on Vkontakte, in Yandex, and etc. So we are living into some kind of bubbles, right? So, and many elements of the informational warfare is the element of messaging on narratives, how Kremlin would like to act, how societies should act or not to act. Professor Kateryna Wolczuk was saying about a mobilization element of the messages of the propaganda. I would say, and this is true, but sometimes and mainly in this element of, for example, during the conflict in Ukraine, the main reason or the main goal of the Russian propaganda is to, on one hand, in the Russian society, to calm people down or make them not to react on the situation, in the sense, look on the TV, everything is under control from the Russian government. Special operation in Ukraine is this great success. Russia is stepping up against the United States and NATO, and you, as a citizen of this country, you cannot do anything because the system is too strong. Kremlin is too strong. Repression is too big. Stay at home. So not to mobilize the political, social life, and etc. How it is messaging to the West? The same. Take back the will to fight. And here it is using also messaging about the nuclear weapon, about the nuclear threat. Because it's threatening that if you will help Ukraine, then Russia is having nuclear weapon. Remember, if you what kind of messages we hear after 5 months of fighting, Ukrainians fighting, European politicians are saying Russia cannot win this war. Very rarely we can hear that Russia needs to be defeated. It is because the nuclear threat and the will of this propaganda that Russia cannot be defeated because it's too big. It's having the biggest, second big army, and etc. And we are too weak to do so. And this is the aim of the propaganda: to take back the will to fight, or to help Ukraine with arms. I don't know if you remember, but during the first months of the war, there was a huge discussion about should we help Ukraine with the defensive weapon or offensive weapon. Yeah? And that was the discussion, very important. And now we are having the discussion about the rockets. Should we have rockets? I mean, how many range of the rockets should be? Will they reach Russian territory or not? Right? Because there is always this kind of messages, the information warfare, that to take back the will of fighting. And the third bubble to this international, and this will be the last sentence. The third bubble, and also Professor Kateryna Wolczuk was saying about this, the third bubble is global bubble. And we are, I would say that in the West, it is now very hardly for Russia to be effective in this informational warfare, because we know who is aggressor. But in the bubble of global bubble, in Africa, in South America, and in China, and in Asia, in India, the Russian messages and Russian propaganda is working, unfortunately. And sometimes I feel that we are in our bubble, and we perceive Russian aggression in some contexts, but we need to remember that we are Europocentric somehow, and the rest of the world, we need to also convinced of Russia aims and how it's working, and that two sides, two elements of this hybrid car is still working, and it is dangerous for the whole world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And the floor is yours, Professor Julien Theron, Sciences Po. Please, you 20-25 minutes.
Yeah, I'll try to make it efficient. Hi, I'm a Western scholar. I'm saying that because we talked about us earlier. Although I'm very glad to be here, and I thank the organizers, because we try to relay your security concerns in the West, and it's not always easy, but we try to. And sometimes it works a bit. Well, we didn't send a lot of Caesar howitzer in Ukraine, but it might change soon. Many thanks then. I'm trying to be not too geeky about war studies concepts, but I'll try to introduce some of them. We already saw some with hybrid warfare and Maskirovka and so on. In war studies, massive development of theories have actually occurred since, let's say, the end of the Second World War, but also the end of the Cold War. I propose to investigate some of them, it's not exhaustive, but to see how the war in Ukraine is actually challenging our perception. I'm telling you there's a hidden aim in my presentation, which is to try to understand how we got it so wrong. I mean, not everybody, but as a collectiveness. My key point is that there's a huge difference between 2014, the two first wars, the two first invasions of Ukraine, and 2022, because precisely in 2014, Russia tried to innovate in some sense by finding some, still kinetic, but hidden kinetic warfare. In 2022, it got back to traditional conventional warfare. The first one, in Crimea, certainly use conventional elements, as you know, Spetsnaz and marine infantry. So it was, and GRU, of course, as well. But it was in an unconventional way, which was obviously not respecting international humanitarian law like they always do now, by not putting their patches and flags. The second one in Donbass was basically a little bit more inventive because of the sanctions that occurred in Crimea. So they tried to go really more discretionary. Basically, nobody, perhaps you can contradict me in the question session, but I don't know any politician who spoke out loud by saying that Russian conventional forces were in Donbass. I have no example. Nor in the US, nor in the UK, nor even in Poland. And I have contacts, military contacts, who told me, yes, they are. We have the proofs, we have the pictures, we see them. We see the convoys getting through the border and so on. So the question is that, why? I asked to an ambassador once, why our president didn't want to recognize these sort of things. And he said, the fear, because we're afraid of that, of even saying that they were in Donbass. And that's problematic. That's about cognition. So they tried by introducing hybrid, and I have a tiny divergence by thinking that hybrid is not always conventional, but that's a matter of interpretation. They tried to introduce tools that they already had. You know that hybrid warfare was a concept not at all, well, my students sometimes say that, but it's not at all introduced by the Russians. It's introduced by Frank Hoffman in 2007 to describe the war of Hezbollah against Israel in 2006. So it's not at all even a state thing. But as a matter of fact, they just translated it into Gibrinaya Vojna, like you said. They translated it, and they made it appear as, this is the whole and fake debate of Mark, precisely about the Gerasimov doctrine. Mark, after, wrote an article saying that he invented this doctrine. But they tried to appear as inventing something when all the tools that they got into hybrid was present since decades. Disinformacja wojna, political interference, social agitprop. I mean, all of that was already in the playbooks of the KGB since decades. Nothing new there. but they shaped our perception of warfare. And that was their great victory. During 8 years, between 2014 and 2022, we thought that conventional war was not possible, at such a point that even when 200,000 soldiers positioned around Ukraine after 2 invasions, we thought that there was no chance that they would invade. How come? Let's go back to Napoleonic wars, put 200,000 soldiers and ask the Austrian-Hungarian Empire if you think that they're going to invade. Yeah, they think. They think indeed. So they won on the cognition element. What is interesting, perhaps, in this hybrid warfare element is that it joins a concept coming from decades as well, from Liddell Hart, called non-linear warfare. Because hybrid is a panel of tools below the threshold of violence, above the threshold of violence, and you pick up which one you want. And for us, it stopped like at terrorism, instrumentalization of terrorism with Chechnya, as we've seen this morning, and potentially guerrilla, but that's it. Conventional war was not possible, and it is actually. So you pick a little bit what you want, and this is what we call nonlinear warfare. Second element, I want to grasp what we call the generations of war. It's a bit complicated, I'll try to make it simple. 2 US Marine colonels, lieutenant colonels, Lint and Thiel, actually worked on the definition of 4 generations of war. First one, order. Second one, attrition. Third one, movement. Fourth one, messy. Basically, first one, order. Is Russia in? Why not? Second one, attrition. Yes, but not if the West provides as sufficient weaponry to block this attrition. Third one, movement. Well, they tried. They tried with old Soviet techniques to penetrate the Ukrainian territory, but they failed. Not entirely, but partly. The fourth was tempted during 2014, actually, by agitating, by preparing the field with the SBU and within the Ukrainian army in Crimea, by disinforming the Ukrainians in Donbass, by saying that they were columns, hordes of Nazis going to slaughter them. So they tried in 2014, but they've let it down, or more or less, they can't actually make it anymore. Diplomacy is let down. RT Sputnik out. The soft power, the Russian soft power, is dying. So the 4th generation of warfare is out of the table. For now on, that's the key point, for now on. Some other authors tried to theorize a 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th generation of warfare. I'm trying to make it simple. 5th generation of warfare, it's about transnational movements and through soft approach. They tried to do that a little bit with Ruski Mir, for instance, but they didn't manage to, or Novorossiya, for instance, but they didn't manage to make it very efficient until now. 6th generation of warfare, McDermott's idea of a Russian non-contact warfare. The least we can do is that there is much contact nowadays, so non-contact warfare out. 7th generation automated warfare. So if you don't just listen to Vladimir Putin or Sergei Shoigu during the 9th of May about the absolute weapons, we can say that, yes, they can be stopped, and automated weapons, as I don't know if you followed a little bit, I don't know how the Ukrainians are, analyzing the Russian drones or these sort of things, but T-90M, out. T-14, they still have only one for the 9th of May on the Red Square, so they don't have much automated weapons. It's not China, it's not the US. And the 8th generation of warfare is an automated warfare without even casualties. So you see that since the 4th generation warfare onward, Russia is not innovating anymore. Actually, they regressed to the 2nd and 3rd attrition movement. That's what they did between 2014 to 2022. Third point in my demonstration, the question of political warfare and the de-weaponization of everything. The huge debate between 2014 and 2022, especially by precisely Mark Galeotti, who wrote 2 books, Political Warfare and The Weaponization of Everything, is that war was becoming absolutely everything. You could weaponize individuals, things, ideas, everything. In the Kremlin, they decided to go back once again to that. It's an anti-hybrid movement in some ways. Is it political warfare? Well, it is not much a political warfare because there's less and less political influence of Russia in our societies. And believe me, I'm French. I see that in my own country, where they have a massive influence usually with the left anti-imperialism and with the far right, even within the administration. So the influence decreases. But it is a political warfare because it's a warfare between autocracy against democracy. They can't let Ukraine, an independent and democratic Ukraine, next to Russia because it will work better. You might remember that during his invasion speech, Vladimir Putin said that Ukraine was a corrupt country. It's not the most non-corrupt country in the world, certainly, but I checked the scores and Russia is more, actually. So it's a better example in terms of anti-corruption. In terms of imperialism, it is political. In terms as well of ethnocentrism, it is political. And in terms as well of war practices, for instance. It is definitely against the international order. The other point is that it's also a political de-weaponization of everything, because this is the collapse of Russian soft power. I have a colleague at Sciences Po who is Russian, who's working on Russian soft power in Central Asia, and even in Central Asia, Russian soft power is completely declining. Because Putinism is not an ideology, it's a method. And it's a method always going forward and forward and forward, and at the end of the day, they just threaten you to nuke you. That's what they do. I don't know if you remember, but they sent Iskander a few years ago into Kaliningrad, nuclear-capable missiles, because we've put some anti-missile batteries. And then, when Finland said that they wanted to join NATO, they didn't have any choice. They said, oh, be careful, we have nukes. And Finland, let's say, yeah, and we don't care. So my point is just that they're always over the top. They're always at the top of the spectrum between conventional and nuclear. They are over there. They don't have any room more to threaten us. They're always in this area. Fourth point, I think that it's interesting, like Russia went back to classical conventional warfare, to have a couple of teachings from two other theories. One is called, it's not very well known even in war studies, it's called compound warfare theory, which is developed by Huber, and which is the cooperation between conventional forces and non-conventional forces. Russia was really late in Syria doing so. The actor doing so in Syria was Iran with Hashid al-Shaabi. Russia was not doing that at all. And at some point they understood that it's good to bomb, it's good to play the Security Council at the UN, it's good to control Bashar, few Spetsnaz, Hmeimim base, Latakia Navy base, but that was not much. They didn't control the lands. And in Syria, the land is everything. The land is the money, the economy. And as you know, that's what they do in Africa and everywhere now. They want to control just bits of territory to get the money. So they began to actually work with proxies, precisely the Tiger forces. And this is something that we see a little bit because of the capability problems in Ukraine by mobilizing DPR, LPR, and perhaps tomorrow Kherson PR. But in Ukraine, it's more auxiliaries. As you know, they are deeply intertwined with the military intelligence. So it's more auxiliaries than proxies per se. So Russia, it's one of their key weaknesses. They don't know a lot how to work with locals. They dominate, but they don't work with. Second element, the lessons of counterinsurgency. Because in Ukraine, as we know, there are, at the time I'm speaking, already a partisan warfare going on in the south, near Melitopol, for instance, and in other places. Sometimes soldiers left behind, sometimes probably military intelligence doing some sabotage and so on and so forth. So I tried to check a little bit to scan the Russian strategy in Ukraine in occupied zones regarding to the classical counterinsurgency theories such as Galula, Trinquier, Nagel, Kilkalin or Petrus. There is a potential for Russia to develop these sort of things, especially in connection with Syria, because they learn a little bit about Hezbollah doing so in Syrian cities. But they always go back to traditional Soviet-style oppression, like they did in Budapest in '56 or elsewhere, meaning you put tanks, you put soldiers, they don't go out of the barracks, and as my sources indicate, this is exactly what they do in occupied territories in Ukraine. So they don't progress in counterinsurgency. I would even say that they do counterinsurgency, if I may say, or anti-counterinsurgency, because in counterinsurgency theory, you have to work with the population. You have to speak the language. We used to say that it's commission officer warfare, counterinsurgency. You have to keep the same soldiers in the streets, that they have to know the people, to ask about their family, to speak the language, to work with them, to deal about their water issues, job issues, and these sort of things. That's counterinsurgency. That's how you win against an insurgency. And this is exactly the inverse of what Russia does in Ukraine or elsewhere. They don't communicate. They oppress. This is very different. So to finish, my last point is about a small exploration of Russian warfare theories. I want to start with the Panarin information security doctrine, which is not technically speaking a warfare theory, but how you assure security, your interest, if you prefer, through the control of information. It's very difficult to measure, but it's, as I said, going backward in the West. But it's true, and I definitely join Agnieszka about that. It's definitely working in the Middle East, in Africa, and in Southern Asia or Southeastern Asia, for instance. And it would be a deep mistake from us if we don't understand that a huge part of the world is actually liking what is doing Vladimir Putin, because it's appear as strong, because it's anti-West, whatever the motivation, a lot of people in the world like it and are ready to support it, and we'll have to deal with this world after. Second Russian theory, Bartosz, who is close to the Kremlin without being technically a strategy from the Kremlin. He worked a lot on control chaos theory, but basically what does Bartosz is saying, like, you have chaos, you produce chaos, or chaos is already there, and you will slightly, discretionarily, push within chaos for the solution that defend your interests by corrupting political leaders, by using the media, and so on and so forth. And this is not what they do now, because they use, massive coercion. So they have let down that as well. Third theory, reflexive control. So as you know, it's a huge thing coming from the 60s, actually, with several layers and so on and so forth, which is the way to incline to the populations, but it doesn't work much either. There's a debate about, within this theory about, is it just the camouflage, maskirovka, or the stratagem? And as a matter of fact, we see that there's nothing camouflaged anymore on Russian action. We can see it. That's even the new US strategy to show it. So we're back to the stratagem, but as we know, all the stratagem of Vladimir Putin didn't work in Ukraine. There's an advanced theory, which is the top of the art of Russian military thinking these days. It's called cybernetics of the third order. It's really interesting. The most prominent thinker is Lepsky. Advanced tool to understand warfare, okay, but still it is supposedly based on autonomized social system. Understand, you just have to, let the societies go, and if you give them the good ingredients, they are under your control. That's it. And this is exactly what they don't do. Once again, huge force applied to society. Last elements. My favorite Russian military thinker is called Yevgeny Eduardovich Messner, and he developed the concept of miatej vojna, which is the better translation for me is mutiny warfare. It is the idea of war is becoming something so advanced that you don't have a motivation for war, you don't have leaders, you don't potentially have weapons. Everything is horizontal. It's a little bit what we see in the social movements of the Gilets jaunes, in Hong Kong, or these sort of things. No leader, purely horizontal. Messner goes even further because he says that you don't even have motivation at some point. You just do war. And that's, for me, the paragon of the most advanced Russian military thinking. The guy was during the Cold War. And this is what they've let down in Moscow. I'll stop here. I had a couple of other examples, but I just want to say something. We missed the point in 2022 because we missed the idea that they could go back to conventional warfare. Hopefully, they had their own cognitive bubble, so they did their own mistakes, but we have been lucky for that. Today, if they didn't do these mistakes, they could have held the entire Ukraine. Second, deception doesn't work much on Russia, but they know that deception works on us, so they will improve that and come back. Third, we are very bad into anticipating war, very bad. Now we're very happy because we motivate each other and because we give a lot of weaponry to Ukraine and Ukrainians are very brave and so on. But it doesn't mean that we are still thinking the war to come, because there's another one coming. It will come, again, elsewhere. Suwalki, Bosnia, Gotland, Svalbard, wherever. It will come. They will do something else against us. For now, they are very concentrated on Ukraine, but they will come again. And who is thinking the war to come? Nobody. We were talking about that yesterday. Nobody has been fired. Diplomats, politicians, scholars, journalists. We all missed the point. Nobody has been fired. The same men think through the same prism of analysis something that they didn't see coming. This is really problematic. So anticipation, we're still very bad, and we have to think through what is coming. And in this respect, imagine that they did a lot of mistakes. They're old Slovakia. They know how to learn about their mistake, and they will reinvent something that might topple us down because we have been lucky this time. Fourth point, adaptation is extremely important in this respect. Some countries adapted. I will start by my own, so as a counterexample, because I think that France is the country that the less adapted itself regarding to the situation. We still think that we can convince Russia about doing whatever we want because we're friends, you know. Second country, Germany. Okay, they don't do a lot. They have political issues. They have politi issues. But regarding to where they come from, I think that they had a better adaptation than France, for instance. The US adapted perfectly, but be careful. It's purely conjectural because there's Joe Biden at the head of it. In 2 years, it might be entirely different. So once again, some luck there. And fourth country, and I'll finish on that, Finland. Finland adapted perfectly, but they adapted actually before, which is a very good case of neutrality because they have a strong army and a strong military culture, which is the exact contrary of what Putin wanted for Ukraine. They wanted to join NATO, so they are in advance. And I'll finish with these words. Yes, I'm a Western scholar, but if we define Western by the will and the ability to fight for the West, I think that the most Western are the Ukrainians and the Finns today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we have about half of hour for discussion. So please, your question to our participants.
In terms of the effectiveness of Russian propaganda, and it's really to Agnieszka Legucka, my question is, are we seeing a qualitative change with this Crimea euphoria in 2014 and now, or is it more of the same? And you are talking about sort of passivity and cynicism and demobilization as the most effective. Having said that, we've seen from the Russian people actually understanding that they need to show loyalty, especially from the regions sending a message to Moscow, both from the people but also in institutions. Lev Gutkov talked about negative mobilization, a mobilization about the image of enemy, opposing the enemy. And from that point of view, is it just passivity or is it active mobilization in terms of negative but being very, very effective. And I couldn't agree more on the sort of nuclear weapon front. I just wonder, if there is already this debate. It's not something I followed, so I'd be interested if there is already this discussion amongst the scholars and experts. What does it mean? Where does it take us? Because exactly that an element of the puzzle about the liberal world order not being shaped by norms and treaties and institutions as such. And it was so interesting here about the 1990s, because this is exactly where we need to go. And we are going back 30 years and taking stock, and I think it's so important. So I'm in the same camp, but there is so much that happened, and we just didn't study it and consider. And now we know that everything mattered back, in the early 1990s. And on this sort of on the issue of warfare, one thing that was interesting that Ukraine in 2014 didn't call it a war. We had those occasions like Ilovaisk and Debaltsevo when regular Russian troops were deployed, but Russia refrained. What about the consequences? In a way, now we have the special military operation versus the anti-terrorist operation. Do you think, does it matter, or was it just, does it matter that we didn't call it the war? And this ambivalence about what did we have between 2014 and 2021, effectively. And the second, you seem to be convinced that Russia will not stop. It's just, the first installment. I'm just interested, because this is the 1 million or 1 million euro question in terms of what's the red line, what's the end goal. And from your point of view, I was asked this question, so now it's to put you on the spot in terms of the aims and Russia's ability to push and sustain. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Volchuk. And who wants to start? Agnieszka, maybe?
Okay, perhaps I will first to answer. Okay, that's the very interesting questions, and I think that if I would have another hour, that would be perfect to answer. I think that there are differences between Crimea effect and now today's situation. Because on many reasons. First reason is that Crimea annexation was the perfect operation from the Russian society point of view. On one hand, it was without casualties. So it was like a clear operation in the military way. So they defending, from the propaganda point of view, how it was perceived also by Russians, and also returning historical justice to returning this territory to Russia. So that was the pure euphoria for this act of aggression. But it is not seen as an act of aggression, of course. Also, a very interesting thing. Okay, I will. I will concentrate on this topic. But now, this operation, this so-called special military operation, it was a huge shock for the Russian society. Because for many months, Russian authorities were saying there will be no war, no military operation against Ukraine. And then on one day, Vladimir Putin said, okay, we will going to invade Ukraine because... so there were a lot of speculation about will they invade or not, but the Russian authorities were all the time saying, no, will be no, calm down, there will be no war between Russia and Ukraine. So that there was a big shock in the Russian society. But yes. But what Russian society is doing, the most important thing, it's trying to adapt to the situation. And it is very difficult to rely on the opinion polls, but on many, I'm not only relying on the government opinion polls because they are not reliable at all, but even on Levada opinion polls, it is also difficult to rely. But they are showing the support for the so-called special operation, more than 70% of society. But what interested me more was that how often the percentage of Russian actively following the situation in Ukraine. And it was 29% of Russians. And that brings us to the conclusions that in Russian society there is something which I also, in terms of my talks with many experts and sociologists, something which they call as a denying of the situation. That they don't want to believe that there is a Bucha, that Russian soldiers are doing so horrible things in Ukraine. They really want to believe that Russian soldiers are providing humanitarian aid, that they are only bombing military infrastructure, etc., etc. And that's why they believe they would like to believe in such a propaganda what they are receiving from the TV. And about this negative mobilization it's a different story, because on one hand they like to believe in this so-called special operation, military operation, because it is a special operation. It is limited to part of the Ukraine. It is limited operation to so-called kontraktniki, the professional military. But when was the idea or like speculations that Putin will call the full mobilization and he will call the full war with Russia, that is the limit of love to the imperialistic Russia. And I would say that it is some kind of negative mobilization, meaning that many Russians are destroying this military mobilization units that they don't want to go to army. Also in many regions since April this year, only 30% they receiving these recruits because in Russia people don't want to go for war. And this is this red line for the Russian society. On one hand, they okay with this operation, but not going to the full-scale war. So also Putin is having some limits when it comes to this war. Thanks.
Well, I'll be brief. As for the nuclear world order changes and transformation because of the recent events, there are some, there is not a debate actually, there are some ideas about the possible changes in one or the other sphere, but there is no serious debate about the fundamental changes. I don't think that many people see that. Mostly there is an idea that it's a momentum for the supporters of the treaty on prohibition of nuclear weapons, but they are standing very far from any kind of conceptual things, and I'm afraid they even don't know what deterrence is. In spite of the fact that they operate with this word, but I don't think that there are any kind of theories standing behind. So this is the idea that something is going to change, but not that much, and everyone, because in the background of all of this debate is the fact that the TPNW supporters, they say, no, we are for the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty because it's a good thing. However, it's not that good, so we would like just to reinforce it, but it won't work, that reinforcing. I think that the most, and especially academics, who work in this field, they understand already that it's not something which can support the NPT, but it's something which should break the NPT, and they think that the NPT should be broken because it gives that kind of double reality where one state is not agreeing with nuclear deterrence idea and the others do, and they still try to coexist in one reality, which is unfair. So they think that the NPT should be just buried, and then we should build up the new beautiful world. However, the biggest but is that part of the world will not be in this new beautiful world, and then we'll have some kind of anarchy going on because of that split. Yeah, thank you.
And Professor Theron, please.
I'm going to be quite quick. You're right. Ukraine played the game by not calling it a war in the east, but calling it the anti-terror operation. I think that they were supported by the international community, and especially Paris and Berlin, for the Normandy format, trying to take it below the war threshold. And played within, calling state terrorism, Russia, and these sort of things. As local Ukrainians were implied as well, so on one side of the coin. What is funny, I think, is that's now Russia not calling it a war, and although everybody sees it, so I mean, I think it's a bit of historical irony, actually, into that. For the second question, Russia will not stop. What's the red line? Well, that's the return of containment, I'm afraid. Not only there, but also in terms of counter-disinformation, for instance, in Sahel, also in terms of support for Malian forces in the Middle East, for instance, because we talked a lot about Syria, but they also they received, for instance, some Hezbollah MP in Moscow talking about this sacrosanct stability, you know. They went to Myanmar to even contest Chinese influence there, to speak about stability there. Stability is the new trend for, autocracy now, and there's a lot of countries which like that a lot. So containment first, and I will end by quoting one of my friend and colleague, Russian-speaking person from Crimea, Ukraine, and who said that Putin will stop where we stop him.
Okay, dear colleagues, we have about 15 minutes for next round of questions, please. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Anna Novikov from the University of Greifswald. First of all, I would like to thank the speakers for such a fascinating panel. And now I have a question, actually, or remark to Julien Theron, following actually the discussion of Agnieszka Legucka on the point of efficiency of Russian propaganda and relating to the bubbles. Because as far as I understood from your point, it's quite not efficient towards the European actually audience, but from my own experience from the Middle East, actually, and what you have mentioned earlier, that there is also a global level of impact of Russian military propaganda for already several years. And as far as I could see, actually, there is a huge, massive support of Russia based actually first on the, I would say, post-colonial or memories of imperial memory there on this region and of the power, and actually, which is not efficient in terms of being outdated, not really actual nowadays, as you told, oppressive and dominant. That's regarded actually as a very clear language which is familiar there. And actually there's also a sort of support of a big leader force. It's something familiar because actually sometimes the language of democracy or of non-direct or more sophisticated European propaganda, it's actually much more complicated to get. It sounds much more dangerous. In the language of Putin, of Russia, this clear dominant language, it's very clear, and therefore it's also against support. So I would be glad maybe to hear some discussion, some reflections on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please.
2 remarks. Agnieszka, firstly, perfect description of this information war. It is this narrative, Russian narrative, it is anti-system argument. Well, but I add one element unpresent in your presentation. It is firstly directed now to some very conservative forces in the world, to far right and right. Many Polish, in Poland, it is seen often as post-communists. And in fact, with Kirill and this very special concept of religiosity, etc., Russia is rather stressing very conservative, anti-progressive picture of the world, and is mobilizing the populism from this side. It's something what I would add to your presentation. And Mr. Professor, to you a question. I suppose, I doubt whether we have any Russian military doctrine. Why? Because it is based mostly on ideology, Russian ideology. It is the first point. And military doctrine is only a product of ideology. It's Gerasimov, etc. But that is why it is so, in fact, so weak and so unmodern. Because ideology is the main background, and it is not a concept of militarist issues, but how to realize some ideological issues. And that is why it is so connected with information war, because information war, it is firstly what Professor Legucka said, is firstly narrative. So we have narrative, and narrative, it's a way, it's a cheap weapon. And this cheap weapon is used accordingly to ideology. Well, it's my question to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and maybe one more last question.
My name is Olga Brusylovska. I'm from Young Scientists Program. So my question also for you, Professor Legucka. We know that according to statistics from Nevada Center that more than 50% of Russian citizens support Putin. And my question is how we can mobilize Russian people, how we can find common points with them, how we can get out them from this neutrality. Thank you.
I guess my question comes to Mr. Theron. I have read a little bit about the ideas of Messner, and I see, as long as I read this, I didn't see the difference between this type of war he proposed and the hybrid war. And also, I read a very interesting thing that he said that the war is a form of struggle for existence, and it will be acceptable according to the law of life, unless it is devastated by other forms. Which are the other forms which could replace the war?
So about the Russian propaganda in the Middle East, I'm not entirely sure that I understood, but yes, there's this culture for the strong man that Russia definitely plays on, and you have all these mugs with Hassan Nasrallah and Bashar and Putin all together, and I think that all of this propaganda plays a lot on miseducation of people. This is one of the reasons why it works in poor areas, for instance. And my key point is that when I see my own society, I see a society that turns down education, actually, all over the place. And that scares me about precisely the success of propaganda. I was talking about, the Putin cronies in French politics. As far as you know, you might have noticed that we had parliamentary election last weekend, and that now we have a good third of the parliament far left and far right, actually. That's developed a lot. And the youth actually doesn't go to vote anymore. That's a massive abstention. So when I see, and I think it's connected to education, actually, yeah. So that's my answer. Another thing about the Russian military doctrine, is there one? Well, for me, the 2022 doctrine is called Iserson, and it's a Soviet military doctrine, and it doesn't work. Because it's old, because it's based on T-64, and that the Ukrainians know it. I was in Kiev in January, and I talked with them. They were in the same schools, learning the same strategies, and that the Russians forgot that, actually, that they were Soviet as well, so that they know these sort of things. More basically, what I think is interesting with Gerasimov's article in the Militaro-Industrial Courier, where all the mess about his pseudo-doctrine came from, I don't consider Gerasimov as the author of any doctrine, indeed. I think that there's no specific doctrine today. I mean, there's an official document called the doctrine, but there's no particular thought. What is the most interesting is that when Gerasimov wrote this piece, he said, we can do military, but we can do also propaganda, we can do cyber. He listed the list of abilities of the Russian army, and he has put all that at the service of the politics. He said, and we are serving you. In a context of competition within the Russian state, with the media, for instance, and all the branches and the SVR and so on and so forth. So he tried to gather all the tools he can to gather power, because this is how it works basically in politics and especially in autocracies. So yeah, I definitely agree about the lack of doctrine, military doctrine or even strategic doctrine. And I think it's the sinking or the failure of 2022 indeed in this respect. And last question about Messner. Well, yeah, true. How Messner joins fourth generation of warfare is the fact that he says that it's all about identity. And what is the existence? They don't fight for the Russians. I think that rather they like Putin or not, the Russians know that they don't care about, grabbing Donbass or something like that. They work for themselves. That's Siloviki. I mean, even the liberals don't play the same role as 10 years ago in Moscow. So they work for their own regime. That's the existence that they are protected with this type of war. Thank you.
Professor Legucka.
Okay. A few points about also funny thing about Gerasimov doctrine, if I may, that also Mark Galeotti once wrote an article, sorry for creating Gerasimov doctrine, because he wrote an article about the Gerasimov. I mean, he was writing about what has Gerasimov said. And he titled it the Gerasimov Doctrine, and then people started to quote him, but they only quoted the title. And then actually in the article, he was saying that there is no such a thing like a Gerasimov Doctrine, because he was like, actually Gerasimov was describing was the United States, what kind of United States was providing conflict, what kind of conflicts the United States was providing at that time. So, and then a few months later, Gerasimov wrote an article, sorry for creating Gerasimov doctrine. So that's the point to confirm. To your question, yeah, I was simplifying the bubble of global bubble, but definitely I think the most effective, it's hard to say it's effective, but where Russian narrative is working on many levels, and the reasons why it is effective is Middle East and North Africa, maybe not North Africa, in the different places of Africa, but there are differences in many regions in Africa, but Middle East is strongly where Russia is using these post-colonial narratives and where this element of anti-American, anti-European, anti-France approaches is really, really working. So fully agree with this, what you said. And coming to this conservative messages also, I can only agree. But only one thing that Russia is lack of any kind of ideology. So how it is working in the world, in the also particular countries when it comes to disinformation campaigns. So sometimes it's confronting, let's say, two sides or messaging to different groups. So it has it is preparing some messages to conservative party and sometimes to leftist party. And you can Google one example, like Pizzagate, when Russia was just recognizing how social media is working to polarize society, and they made the event. They made an event that one group they messaged that there will be something on the in American city that and actually people believe that there will be they will receive the pizza on on the streets, and they've gathered and they were waiting for the free pizza, and because the messages was spread in the social media. But as you said also, that the Russians were very present on the far right and on the far left. So I agree that they are creating themselves as a conservative state, conservative gateholder, but at the same time, when it comes to these messages, they can adapt to any kind of group just to be effective. And to your question, very important, and I think the most important, also the very hard. I would say that even more Russians, when it comes to Levada Center, support more than 80% of Russian citizens. When it comes to this opinion polls, support Putin nowadays. For now it will be very difficult, but I believe that this war is existential war for himself, exactly Putin himself, for this Putin's regime, because as I said, and everyone says, not everyone, there is I will underline it once again, there is a message that Russia should not be defeated in Ukraine. Why? Because there is behind thinking that if Russia will be defeated, something wrong will be in the system. From our point of view, it could be positive in the sense that this imperialistic state can be divided into pieces, like any kind of imperial someday can be divided into pieces. So Russian Federation can be not be any federation soon in 5 years, 10 years, or whatever, and the Russian society can be exhausted for this war. I'm not saying for the because we already agree here that this war will not last, 5 weeks, but it can stay with us for longer. And I believe that for now the Russian society is not capable, able, willing to protest. The level of protest is like 40% for now. But we don't know what kind of situation will be in the society in the future. And the hope is also with the society and the mobilization activities with the diaspora. In a few days, I go to Prague for the first Congress of Russian Civil Society. And I will perhaps will know better how they will organize themselves. And I don't know if you know this flag, white, blue, white, which tries to be anti-war, anti-Putin movement, which is like, for now it's like network more and not organized well. But perhaps there is some kind of activity here and hope for the better Russia.
So thank you very much for participation in our panel. Thank you for our speakers once more. This is only the beginning of fruitful discussion further. And I suppose the lunch is waiting, and this is very important for us too. So enjoy. Thank you. And bye-bye.